record this.
Okay, we are now recording. So for tonight's program, we're only showing several short segments, but you've got to see the whole program. Now, both the DVD and the CD of the tour are available, and if you just go to zamir.org, you will find them. And we do rely on your generosity to keep our programming going, especially during this challenging year. And now, enough talking. Let's get started on our musical journey. Hit it, Gail.
I got rhythm. I got.
I believe that's the wrong segment. Doo doo doo.
Yeah, segment one would be a good one to start with.
This only ever happens.
I'm just so delighted it's somebody else, not me, having to push the button.
Okay, this one says segment one. Let's try this one.
We're the Zamir Chorale of Boston, 50 American Jews who love to sing. And we've come to the heart of Poland to perform songs that haven't been heard here since the Holocaust. One of our first stops was this building in the city of Lodz, Poland, where our musical ancestors, the original Zamir Chorale, rehearsed and sang until they were silenced 60 years ago. By the 1930s, Zamir had caught on like wildfire. All across Poland, but especially in Lodz, where 40% of the population was Jewish. And Jews played a huge role in the cultural and artistic life of the city.
Lodz was a very young Jewish community, a community with great ambitions, a lot of imagination that combined both their economic endeavors as well as their spiritual endeavors and artistic endeavors. So it was really a very appealing city.
I feel this great connection with the people who sang in Zamir back in Poland, especially because my family is from there and I don't know anything about them. And I like to imagine that maybe members of my family sang in that choir.
I'm hoping that some of the reason that the original Zamir was formed can be brought out. Why they'd put themselves out, as we do, why they come to rehearsal every week, why they studied this particular music, and what it may have meant to them.
We wanted to know more about the people who once sang here, the original Zamir Chorale. Most of them perished in the death camps, but a lucky few made it out of Poland. Carol Tillerman was 17 when she escaped just before the Nazis closed Lodz. Singing in Zamir had been her life.
To me, Zamir was like my world, my love, my beauty, my everything. When we came into the building, it was like a temple of holiness, of music. Each room where we rehearsed was almost like a concert hall, but the acoustics was so beautiful.
I teraz brak nam tego, co wnosili żydowscy artyści.
We are missing the Jewish contribution to our life, to our economy, to our art and the other domain. They were very active and very important.
Thank you for welcoming us as the Zamir Chorale of Boston. But I think I speak for all of us when I say that at this moment, we feel that we are the Zamir Chorale of Łódź. When they gave us some old papers from their city archives connected with the original Zamir Chorale, we could finally hold something in our hands that was a direct link to those singers of so long ago. In those days, every Zamir concert began with the Zamir Anthem. a call to Jews to join in this exciting new expression of Jewish culture. When we sang the anthem, it was the first time it had been heard in Lodz since the Holocaust. Tillerman remembers the Lodz Zamir's crowning achievement. In 1939, they put on a full production of La Traviata in Yiddish.
People were sitting in the audience with a score and trying to find some flow. Nothing. Everything was syllable for syllable. It was so perfect. And we felt so happy that we achieved the goal that we wanted. We worked for it so long. And none of us could know what will happen in a few months.
In September 1939, the Nazis invaded Poland. By 1941, they had sealed the Lodz ghetto. No Jews would be allowed to leave, except in transports to the death camps. Those who remained slowly starved. Despite the awful conditions, the Zamir Chorale continued to perform as best they could. One of the survivors of that time is Arnold Mostovich, who remembers the power of Zamir's music in those dark days.
Były to chwile całkowitego, chwilowego, no, ale zapomnienia o tym, gdzie się żyje i jak się żyje i co nas czeka. To człowiek mógł na chwilę zapomnieć, ale też, pardon, na chwilę, proszę pamiętać. Bo wystarczyło nie pomyśleć, tylko mniejszą uwagę zwrócić na orkiestrę, a czego odczuwał tak straszliwy, bezustanny głód. Prawda, nikt, który tego nie doznał, nie potrafi tego zrozumieć.
It was in this little ghetto theater that the Zamir Chorale of Lodz gave its last performance.
verjogt von unser Haus in finsteren Licht, getrieben uns in Feld und Sturm, Hagel, Wind hat uns begleit, mein Kind, begleit uns in den Abgrund von der Welt. Machst du die Engel und grünen Fängel und kreisen darum, zu kommst von dein Weg, das Fänger in der Hand, das Kreuz in Arsch zu Brand. Wir losen sich, mein Kind, so
Warsaw, one of the largest cities on our 8-concert tour of Eastern Europe. This is the place where our music began 100 years ago. But after the Holocaust, only a handful of Jews remain here.
Da'u lifnei mi atem omedim. Be very aware of before whom you are singing. Not only the people who are here now, but the people who aren't here now. We're going to sing the Rossi Hallelujah.
Every place we went, we sang Hallelujah by Salomone Rossi, the earliest known Jewish choral music. It seemed especially appropriate when we visited the only synagogue in Warsaw that survived World War II.
We're reaffirming that it wasn't, the Nazis did not succeed. We are still here.
Rob, to you. Unmute, please.
Thanks, Josh. I happened to be recording the audio for that moment because Frank Coakley, our audio guy, was setting up the microphones in the auditorium, where you saw the chorale in their tuxedos. And Josh, I know there's a story about the Maksuga Egelak that involves both you and Pam, and I was wondering if you could tell us your part of it. When I hear those solos by Joyce and Scott and the way the whole chorale resonates, it's amazing that they had never seen it. If I remember correctly, they never seen the music until that morning, and they sang it that afternoon. Can you explain that?
Yeah, I had found this lullaby that was written by Begelman, and it was sung by the mothers to their children, to their babies, during this time of the Nazi occupation of Lodz, when their future was so uncertain, with lines like, Mach zu die Egelach, close your little eyes, our house is ashes and fire. My child, we must seek our fortune. You and I will endure difficult times. We have no idea where our path will lead us. And I wanted it to have maximum emotional impact, so I didn't teach it to the choir in advance. Obviously, we had rehearsed and rehearsed and rehearsed for all other programs. But on the way, on the bus, on the way to the cemetery, I handed out the sheet music. And we learned the music on the bus, so that the first time we ever sang this, are we back? The first time we ever sang this was in the cemetery, singing to these tombs and to these graves. It was a very emotional experience. And of course, as I put my hand over there, the other thing that was just so crazy was when that butterfly came and landed on my shoulder And thank goodness we had the cameras there to record it. And I think we all felt that that butterfly was somehow transmogrified the souls of the people who were there and who were not there at that time. She was coming to listen to us.
And that was one smart butterfly, because it didn't just pick anybody's shoulders. It picked the director, and really it perched on your heart.
Yeah.
The only reason that the chorale had, or Josh had that music to give to the chorale, was because of something Pam unearthed. Pam, could you explain how you found that ghetto lullaby before we went on the trip?
Yes, well, as we were looking for people to interview, David Begelman, who was the composer of the music for that lullaby, had a surviving brother, and we went to New York to interview him. Now, Henry Begelman was not, he couldn't be in the film for a number of reasons, but he did show me that music and say that his brother had composed it, the words by, I believe, Isaiah Spiegel is the person. So Josh, I gave it to Josh. Josh, I guess, knew something about it. And then he did the wonderful thing that he did with not letting people rehearse it. And it just, it felt like, because David Begelman was such a powerful composer, it felt like we were bringing the Hazimir chorale back to life yet again in another way.
And thanks so much, Pam. And also, I don't know if we're going to have time to talk about this or not, but if you saw the shots going up the marble steps, which were shot by your slightly hungover moderator at 7 a.m. in the morning after our first night at Woodge, Pam came running in at 6:30 a.m. and said, "I found the steps, I found the steps," which is the actual steps that led to the rehearsal hall that Carol Tillerman was talking about as a fount of holiness.
I just have to say, it was hard getting people out of bed to take those shots up the steps.
Particularly some people. Heather, I know that you talked about how, I believe, your husband David and others in the chorale were wondering, gee, are we going to be able to wear yarmulkes? Or what's it going to be like? What kind of reception? And then there was some graffiti. What were you thinking and feeling when the bus rode into Woodge or Lodge?
Yeah, sure. Actually, it wasn't David. He doesn't wear yarmulke all the time, but there were a handful of men in the chorale who typically wear yarmulke all the time. And as part of our preparation for the trip, one of the things that came up is, what's it like now? What's the anti-Semitism level, and what's it going to feel like being there? Can we kind of be out as Jews? So here we are, we get there to Warsaw, we have our concert, it's standing room only, it's standing ovation, it feels great. And we're all feeling kind of calm about this, and great, this is terrific, we're welcome back. And then in Łódź, we get welcomed by the provincial governor and the archivist. And then we go on the bus to the cemetery, and we're looking around, and there's graffiti that we see, Jewish stars like dangling from a noose, swastikas, and we didn't read Polish, but we asked our either the guide or someone who knew Polish, and we were told, no, it's not anti-Semitic, it's just slurs against rival soccer teams. The way to insult your rival soccer team is to call them a Jew and to use those symbols. So, there was this contrast. And so it had turned out that most of the men who had been in this situation had chosen to wear a baseball cap over their kippah, over their yarmulke, just trying to absorb those contradictions as we were bringing it back.
That's great, Heather, thanks. And the thing that was so eerie was I believe there were 22 Jews left out of 160,000 at the end of the Holocaust in Łódź. And the only sign was that graffiti until we got to the cemetery. And the fact that it had been 60 years since there was a Jew in Łódź, but yet it survived as an epithet is just kind of cringeworthy. We're
Rob,
actually almost
time check.
I do, and I think that I was about to say we're just about entirely on schedule, but I've got to periodically give shout outs. We had this amazing Polish associate producer, Malgorzata Psarska, Gosia to us. Her husband was doing a postdoc at MIT. She was available to us. We become friends for life. She is the one who found Arnold Mostovich. And she got this amazing Polish videographer to shoot that. We were gone. That was after our trip. And it to this day, it's one of the most elegant interviews I've ever been involved in. So we wanted to give her a shout out. And just briefly, you will see, I believe, no, that was it. There's a picture of Carol Tillerman with her husband, Morris. They escaped to the east. She sang the role of Violetta as they made their way across the steppes. Morris ended up joining the Russian army. So he was that rare Jew who became a liberator as well as a survivor. And moving along here, we're headed for the darker part of the film now. And Josh, I'm making a presumption here, and Pam suggested that communal mitzvah was something that I didn't necessarily have any business using, but when you got to Auschwitz, you were able to do something that very few individuals, certainly, or even groups can do at Auschwitz, which was bring your sacred energy into that space. So I'm just wondering what your thoughts were on the bus ride to Auschwitz and what it was, you know, we're going to see the segment in a moment, but what it was like for what you were thinking about how it might go.
Well, it's impossible to prepare yourself for a moment like that. Look, you know, I did not, as I said before, I did not want this to be a Holocaust memorial trip. We did come to honor the memory and the activities of the rich pre-Holocaust culture. But we were there. We had to confront it. We did so with affirmation. So at Auschwitz, and you'll see this in the film, there are two pieces that we sang. At first, we sang Salomone Rossi's setting of Psalm 137, Al Naharot Bavel, mourning the past. But we also sang the anthem Hatikva, the hope looking to the future. And that was the affirmation.
Yeah. And the Hatikva, you will notice it starts almost like a whisper. And then in the second segment, the second part of this segment, which is Terezin, you will hear the full-throated Hatikva. Pam mentioned David Rabinovitz, our wonderful videographer, earlier. His job was to get as close as possible to people experiencing sort of the ultimate emotional catharsis without intruding. And somehow he did it. And part of why we picked David is because he had done his own film previously at Auschwitz, actually. So I think if we roll on, Gail, we'll just about be on schedule, and we could talk about it afterwards. That's a cue.
I got rid.
Boy, she just wants to get to the fun stuff. You gotta go through the dark stuff first, Gail.
You know, I have chosen the correct one every time, but it keeps really wanting to show this one.
Well, sure, that's the fun stuff, but with like the tour, we had to go through the camps to get to the fun stuff.
Nope, that's still the wrong one. Okay. You know, I don't know why this works so well until it doesn't.
Because that's the way it always works.
That is how it works. Okay, let's try this one. Aha!
Oh.
You look out the window, and there are these beautiful fields and beautiful forests and farmlands, and everything is green. Then we remembered 60 years ago. The day we planned to visit Auschwitz and Birkenau was a fast day on the Jewish calendar. The more observant among us prayed. But I think all of us felt that though we had to make this pilgrimage to the heart of the Holocaust, it was going to be one of the hardest things we've ever done.
Let us honor them and let us pray in the way that we do best.
I don't know if anybody else had any idea of specifically what we were going to do, but when we started all standing, holding hands in the circle at the end of the railroad tracks, that was a particularly difficult moment for me.
The singing somehow just helped me to focus on something else and to allow me to escape.
Terezin was unlike any other Nazi camp. It was an elaborate front that Hitler created to convince the Red Cross that he wasn't harming European Jews. The Nazis produced a propaganda film to show that Terezin was a center for art and music, a place for children to laugh and perform. To maintain the charade, all kinds of people were sent to Terezin, including some of Europe's most prominent artists, actors, and musicians. But behind the false front, the reality was very different. Of the 140,000 Jews imprisoned in Terezin, only 20,000 survived. The rest were shipped to the death camps.
I was expecting to be sad, the way I was at Auschwitz-Birkenau, and instead I was terrified. It was very hard for me to walk through the Arbeit macht frei gateway, to know that this is the place where my great-grandmother, was killed. Well, I was hoping to bring some sort of honor to a place that the family can go and honor their memories. Now I'm not so sure. I'm not so sure that there is honor in a place like this.
When we walked into a tiny bakery storeroom that the imprisoned Jews at Terezin used as a secret synagogue, a prayer written on the wall by people who risked death simply by being in this room.
in spite of all this, we haven't forgotten your name. Please do not forget us. Hear our voices. Hear our voices.
That afternoon, we would give our concert on the very stage where the singers of Terezin had been forced to perform.
You know, the amazing thing was that there was always that note of affirmation. It was like a hot and cold at the same time, because sometimes there was the notes of the graffiti we saw in Wood, but there was, in that horrible place, there was such a note of affirmation. Josh, I wonder if you could tell us about what it was like for you on that hot night on a claustrophobic stage with that sparse audience to get the chorale ready, and also what you have learned academically about the incredible concentration of Jewish artists that were at Terezin.
Well, obviously, we had to be prepared for all kinds of experiences, all kinds of acoustics, all kinds of weather. And when you do those kinds of concerts, the challenge is not to be overwhelmed emotionally so that you cannot perform. And yet, you can't totally erase your emotion or you're not giving a great performance. And, you know, there was no way we could sanctify a death camp. And there are those who have said you cannot build monuments to the Holocaust. But what we try to do, as I said, is to give voice to those whose voices had been silenced. Now, about Terezin, it was an amazing concentration of some of the finest Jewish talent in Europe, exiled to this ghetto, this concentration camp, which became a holding pen for the Jews until they could be shipped off to the death camps in the East. Let me just say a few words by one of the great composers there, Victor Ulman, who was and would have been one of the greatest composers of the 20th century. He was forced to go to Terezin, and listen to what he wrote. It must be emphasized that Terezin, or Theresienstadt as they called it, has served to enhance, not to inhibit, my musical activities. By no means did we sit weeping on the banks of the waters of Babylon. Our endeavor with respect to art was commensurate with our will to live. And just an amazing statement of what art, music, and all these other activities was able to give to maintain their humanity to these people whose humanity was taken away from them.
Rob, you're muted.
I remember you saying, Josh, that one thing that the artists at Terezin had was they were actually able to get up in the morning and do what they do. Whatever was descending upon them, Heather, I wanted to ask you, it was actually Heather's husband, David, that was reading the Hebrew on the wall in the hidden synagogue. And Heather, I wonder what that moment was like for you when we were down there.
Yeah, first of all, it was this tiny room and it was almost not possible for us all to be in there at once, but we did it. And we were singing a nigun, a wordless melody that we had learned. And we saw the Hebrew there, and I asked my husband to translate it because his Hebrew is much better than mine. And as you heard, we in spite of all of this, we have not forgotten your name, oh God. Please do not forget us. And I was stunned. I'm still stunned by the idea that there was that kind of faith in that kind of setting. Yeah, that's really it.
So it was just so poignant. Though you have forgotten us, we still remember your name. That to me, that just stuck with me ever since. Pam, I know from being married to you that you do read a lot of books about history, and a lot of those books have been about various camps and experiments and whatever. And I just wondered, after all that you've read, that the knowledge that you had, what it was like to plug into the emotional component that was set loose when you're in those places. Unmute, sweetie.
Sorry. Hard to put into words, just being there with the chorale and being with each person as they experienced it in a different way was very powerful. And actually, Rob, being with you, because while David was filming the choir in the hidden synagogue, Rob and I walked off. This is in Auschwitz, I'm sorry. In Auschwitz, we walked off into the fields by the barbed wire, by the barracks, and just, he filmed there. And I think part of, you won't say this yourself, but his uncle's brother was killed at Auschwitz, was murdered. And so I think being in touch with you, being in touch with that was very, very powerful for me. And it goes beyond and beneath and around any books anyone's ever read. It just hits you. So it was very, very, what can I say? There are no words except those.
Thanks for bringing that up, sweetie. I remember nothing about that. It was like I was able to shoot better than I normally am. However that happened, and something that needed to happen. As we said, was at the end of all of that, there's the Hatikva. The Hatikva is still there, and it was a small house, but actually, Josh, I think you said to the chorale prior to the concert, I think Heather corrected me, if you're only singing to one person, and we saw who that one person was, because apparently he was, hearing something he hadn't heard in a really long time. So we're going to segue now to the lighter, brighter stuff. And Pam, I just have you first on the list. You just spoke, but what it was like for you when we arrived in Krakow, how different it was. We'd just been to Auschwitz. What it was like when we came into that town.
Am I muted? No.
Good.
Okay. Heather, wasn't there something, I just want to make sure we don't lose this.
Oh, I've got her next. I've got it.
Okay, you've got it.
I wanted to get us there first.
All right. Okay, sorry. So Warsaw was strange because it had all been rebuilt. It was burned to the ground. And so we were in a sort of an artificial situation, except for the cemetery, of course, which was just plain spooky. It was like an echo chamber. And we stayed in the hotel that the Nazis had used as their headquarters, which was very, I don't know, just chilling. And I just lost my train of thought. So, and terrorism was terrifying. It was chilling. It was beautiful, but it was chilling because you just knew what happened there. You knew it was like the big lie embodied. And then we got to Krakow, and there was a klezmer festival going on. And Krakow had never been bombed. It was preserved, and you could walk around there and just feel the vibrancy of what Jewish life must have been like at that time. So not only was the music different in different places, but the experience of the cities was different. And so we got to Krakow, and there was some kind of an opening up almost, is how I felt. I wandered around for hours because I didn't have to rehearse, and just walked through the streets and felt what it must have been like. So that's my experience.
And I think emblematically, in Krakow at the Yitzhak Synagogue, which you're about to see, it was in the afternoon. It was beautiful light. The chorale was wearing their light summer outfits instead of their heavy tuxedos with ties by Bob Daskell of Chicago. And product placement. All right, Heather, you get to go next. Absolutely. Heather, tell me the story that you told us about the man who said he was just walking by and he felt he heard the music of Min Hashamayim.
Sure.
And he was drawn to.
I actually want to just first say one quick thing about Auschwitz, which really brings us to this idea of hope, which is that because there was going to be the fast day of Shavat Asar B'Tammuz, a date on the Jewish calendar where the beginning of the destruction of the Second Temple is commemorated. Some of the more religious members of the chorale wanted to have an opportunity to observe that. And that coincided with the day that we happened to be visiting Auschwitz. So through the entire 2-week tour, we carried a Torah. Someone, and I don't recall who, might have been Joel Kaplan or maybe Larry obtained it. Someone can clarify that later. Someone obtained the tiniest Torah. You know, they could just fit in your 2 hands and put it in a little backpack, and it had to be treated with reverence the entire trip. And then we got to Auschwitz, and whether or not you were participating in the prayers, the sight of this flat rock with a Torah, tiny Torah on it, and then a large presence of all of us was, I agree with Josh, you can't sanctify a death camp, but it brought me hope and a sense of endurance. So taking that now to Krakow that you were just asking us about, we get to Krakow, we've been sort of in the depths, and now there's going to be a Jewish music festival. We've got a concert coming up the day before the festival. We get there, and we find out later that there was a man who was born in Krakow, spent his childhood in Krakow, and then left as a school-age child with his family and moved to Israel. And here, many years later, he had come back to his homeland, or the land of his birth, maybe not his homeland, to retrace his steps and his childhood. He had not brought his family, and he was walking around Krakow, walking by the synagogue he used to go to, the Isaac synagogue, as a child. And as he was walking past, he heard the sounds of Jewish music, Hebrew songs coming out. And he said to us later, it was as if min hashamayim, from the heavens, that those sounds came out. And so he was lured in to that room, and he found it to be extremely moving. It really was bringing the music back to where it had been.
Oh, thanks, Heather. And as you will soon hear, it was me and Hashemayim. Pam and I had the pleasure of just being able to listen. And Josh, if you could just briefly, because we're bumping up, I know, Gail, against our time, just tell us about the acoustics at the Yitzhak Synagogue, and also the importance of adding a little American music, a little lighter music, and how reggae found its way into the
Sure. I mean, there were all kinds of acoustical environments on this tour, from singing outdoors, and you heard a little bit of that, to singing in the city hall, and then in these really beautiful, beautiful concert halls or the synagogues. They don't make them like that anymore. Nowadays, you have to have microphones and this and that. These were built before microphones, and they built them with beautiful acoustics for music. All right, so when we go on tour, in addition to our standard repertoire of Jewish music, whatever that is, we bring special repertoire. Now, because we were going to Terezin, We prepared music by the Terezin composers. We went to Lodz and we had the music, the special lullaby that we sang there. But there were two other categories. One is the indigenous music of the people that we are visiting. So I came across this Polish mountain song, and I arranged it for the soloist and the choir. We were fortunate to have Sherry, who really nailed the solo. And as you'll see in the video, we were also fortunate to have a local person who gave Sherry a little lesson on how to sing that in the appropriate style. And the other category is we are representing the United States of America. So we wanted to bring some American music. So we turned to George Gershwin, who was a great choice because, I mean, first of all, he was a Jew, but second of all, his music was the epitome of Americanness.
Yeah, and
may I say something, Rob?
Yeah, sure.
So that local person, Josh, if you recall, was Joasha, and she was our fixer in Poland, and she was the person who made sure we got into the Warsaw archives to get pictures. She was just an amazing young woman, and her father was a salmon fisherman. So she came
a
from
hunter. He said,
salmon
"I am
hunter.
salmon hunter."
Yeah.
And since
So
you brought it up, I've got a 20-second Joasha story. We get to the Warsaw Auditorium. We're trying to get in to set our gear up, and the manager of the theater says, "No, it is not possible. You may not come in." You know, we had everything reserved. $300 later, it became possible. At which point, Joasha turns to Pam. We just met her 2 hours before, and she turns to Pam and goes, "Poland is a very precise country." So we've been parsing that. Anyway, with Josh's lead-in about the Gershwin, you finally get to play segment 3, Gail. I know you've got that one queued up.
I got rhythm, I got music, I got mine, and who could ask for anything more? I got daisies in green pastures, I got mine, and who could ask for anything more? Old man trouble, I won't mind him, you won't find me round my door. I got starlight, I got sweet dreams, I got mine, and who could ask for anything more? Who could ask for anything more, for anything more? I got rhythm, I got rhythm, I got music, I got mine, and who could ask for anything more? For anything more. I got daisies in green pastures, I got mine, and who could ask for anything more? Old man trouble, I don't mind him, you won't find him round my door. I got starlight, I got sweet dreams, I got mine, and who could ask for anything more? Who could ask for anything more?
Here, the buildings of the old Jewish quarter look much as they did when the neighborhood teemed with street life before World War II. We'd be singing in the Isaac Synagogue, a beautiful old shul that somehow survived the Holocaust. One of the pieces we planned to perform is a local song from the nearby mountains called Regle, Mountain Forests.
Imagine that you're just singing.
Sherry, the soloist, discovered that Joasha, a local woman who was helping the film crew, comes from a family of mountain singers.
Powerful stuff.
I recall the thrill of hearing Tikvetenu in the Yitzhak synagogue, and I feel that same thrill every time I hear it. And I was feeling it as I was lucky to be able to put some images into it over the past couple of weeks. And I told Ed, the accompanist, that he was my hero because the chorale was phenomenal. But I just think I told him it's like a 747 taking off. It's just so elevating, which I guess is the point.
And we should give some credit to the composer also for making that amazing music.
Thanks for bringing me back to earth, Josh. I actually wanted to. I forgot. I've still got to moderate a little bit more. I wanted to ask you about the derivation of Tikvetenu, and I believe it was a 9-stanza poet originally.
Yeah. Well, so this is music by the contemporary composer David Berger, and he went back to the original text of the poem that eventually became the national anthem of the state of Israel. And the poem was written by Naftali Hertz Imber in the late 19th century. He's visiting Rishon LeZion, which is a pioneering settlement in pre-state Israel. And he's reading his poem, and a farmer there by the name of Samuel Cohen remembered a farmer's song from his native Moldavia. And he thought it would be interesting to sing those words of the poem to this melody. And of course, that's the melody that we all know for Hatikva. But David did something else. He went back to the original. First of all, the words were changed from the original to become the national anthem of Israel. And second of all, the original had many, many verses, whereas the official national anthem has only one verse. And as you could, we read the translations as we were singing. Very, very powerful, moving. And he was able to create this just fantastic, emotional setting. I think all of us in the choir who have sung that piece can think of moments when we have performed that we have just burst into tears from the music and from the experiences.
Yeah, I always knew when I heard it that was the climax of the film. And full disclosure, we cheated a little bit. Our journey went from Warsaw to Łódź to Auschwitz to Krakow, and then to Prague and Terezin, and finally to Vienna. But really, Tikvetenu was the resolution. And Heather was talking about the Torah being on the wall. It's like an emblem of the whole film visually, and Tikvetenu was like an emblem of the whole journey. And the other just footnote here is that we were at Auschwitz on Friday. The bus ride from Auschwitz to Krakow was something like an hour and a half. There were like 55 or 60 of us, and there was not one sound for that hour and a half. Everybody was in their own processing silo. And then 2 days later, there we were on that stage with that beautifully international audience, a packed house, and the embrace of the Min HaShaim that Heather was talking about. Without Gail having to kick me, I could say that we have 20 minutes left for Q&A right now. So if it's okay, I'm going to turn it back to Gail.
Okay.
I just want to say one very, very quick final thing.
Sure.
I just feel compelled to, which is that bundle of contradictions and emotional roller coaster you described, I think the way that we all got through it is through two things. And the first is community. And I really feel like we can't let this moment go without acknowledging the memory of some of our singers from the tour who are no longer with us. So I just want to remember Jody Wenkelbaum, Sue Karp-Nesson, and Phil Goldman.
Mm-hmm.
And the second, I don't think I missed anyone. And the second thing that helped me stay grounded, and I think helped all of us stay grounded, is the music. It just goes beyond words and beyond thought, and it has the power to help us live in the paradox of conflicting emotions and the past and the future and the present, and make it work for us. So thanks for that extra moment to say those things.
Thanks for adding that, Heather. And while we're giving shout outs, I noticed my sister is out there in the gallery, and she and her husband were a major donor at a critical time in Prague when we were completely out of money and couldn't keep going. So that was a lot of that all along the way that made it possible.
And Rob, I'm going to jump in now, segue from what you just said, to remind our listeners that if you really liked what you saw, you got to see the whole thing, because there were so many scenes that we had to leave out in this very brief summary. And the DVD, and if you want to hear the CD, are all available from our website. I see Larry's holding up the holding up the DVD.
Oh yeah.
But if you go to zamir.org, and you'll also be helping to sustain us in this very challenging year. Thank you.
Thanks,
Josh. I'm actually going to ask a question that is a sort of a continuation of that. So Josh or Heather, I guess, was the trip self-funded? Did members pay their way? Did PBS offset the costs at a later contract?
Go ahead, Heather, but unmute.
Sure. We our goal was to make it possible for everyone to go, but everyone did have to pay some, but it was also subsidized through a lot of fundraising we did with alumni, with friends of Zamir, et cetera. So that was originally for the trip. We did soirees. People hosted soirees in their beautiful homes and invited their friends who were then happy to donate. And PBS never paid a cent, but we did pre and post tour fundraising. And we were very excited when PBS decided to use it as one of their fundraisers.
And Heather, we have to give a shout out to Joyce Bonin. I don't know if she is part of the audience, but she worked tirelessly to raise the funds to make sure that we were able to go. So thank you, Joyce.
And just as a note, Pam and I are as fervent PBS watchers as anyone in this gallery, but they don't pay for nothing. If you go out and raise the money and spend a year and a half and work for nothing and provide them a film that they could use for a pledge drive and make money of, they might air it, but they're not paying for it. That's not the way that's going to work. Okay, Gail, you out there?
Yeah. Here's another question, PBS related. Was there any difficulty in getting permission for shooting at the sites in Poland? And how did PBS stations respond when they were asked to carry the film? That's for Rob.
Well, PBS stations, I think, are very savvy about their fundraisers, and this was earmarked as a fundraiser because it has such profound emotional content. You know, the pocketbook is connected to the heart, and it has a very focused group, so they were quite eager for it. And as I said, in Warsaw, we had no problem getting access once we came up with $300. It was just, we thought everything was arranged. Pam, could you just briefly talk about getting to the archives in Warsaw, what you had to jump through? Unmute.
Sorry. Just let me say about the ease of doing things abroad. Joan Kaufman was also an associate producer, and Joan sort of paved the way for all of that administrative nonsense that people had to go through. She was just a master at that. And she got what's called a carnet, made sure all of our equipment was going. That was not to do with PBS. That was just to do with us and the project. And then, once we got there, we had to deal with things like, a little greasing of the palm and when things were opening or closing. But it was very well arranged ahead of time. And then we just came up against a few bumps here and there.
We also got stopped at the border between Czechoslovakia and Austria for about 6 hours. The film crew had our own van, and our driver was Polish and didn't speak any Czech, or it was interesting. The German, we made it.
Some parts best forgotten.
So presumably there is footage that didn't make the final cut. Is that still around, and would it be worth making it available in some way? That's for Rob.
That is a great question. I was not through with the project quite to the very end, so I really have no idea what happened after that. I don't have no idea. I know that I've got the Pam and I have the Mostovich interview. We have the Carol Tillerman interviews, and we've got like three of the tapes, but the rest of them I have no idea.
Rob, who was the other filmmaker? It was Frank.
Well,
Eric Stange.
Yeah, Eric
Stange,
Stange
right.
was, yeah, he was originally co-producer.
Right.
And Frank Coakley was sound guy, and we talked about David Rabinovich, who was the cameraman, and it was really an incredibly small crew for what we were trying to do, including being in two places at once.
And I should add that before we left, the crew came to rehearsals and were videotaping the rehearsals. Not that they were going to use any of that footage, just so we could get used to having cameras in our faces and not be distracted by that as we performed.
Which incidentally, the chorale did an amazing job. We had a little bit of a first day, it was a little, who are these folks? But after that, it was just like we were one kind of unit moving along together.
So, where was it? So how many people were on the tour? You said you had said 50 singers or 50 people, but there were spouses presumably, and how many singers were there?
Heather.
That's a Heather question.
Interesting question. And I want to say there were 56, but hang on, I have something. Okay, there were 53 on my list of food preferences. And I have here that you do not want to be able to see clearly. So the 53 included some spouses, parents, friends of Zamir, partners, but it was primarily singers and film crew.
Right. Now the film crew would eat anything.
So how many hours of footage were shot to make the hour of documentary? That's a good Rob question.
Goodness gracious. I believe I recall something like 40 or 50 huge digibeta tapes, each about an hour or an hour and a half long. And the thing was that we were not only telling a story about a trip and singing in places like Auschwitz, but we were also shooting entire concerts. So it was a ridiculous amount of footage. And digibeta was so exotic, we couldn't edit directly from that. So we had to make regular beta tapes. So then we had another 50 tapes. And you needed like a wheelbarrow. You couldn't carry it. Larry, do you have more specifics?
I was just going to say there were 65 boxes of tapes.
Lord.
And I have to add that there's one thing to just make a documentary to record the concerts, etc. But Rob was a genius in that he was able to put these pieces together to make to capture the emotions of this tour. So bravo to you, Rob.
Well, you hit my soft spot, Josh. That's the main thing, is putting it together. Thank you for saying that.
So here's a fun question. What was the most memorable meal you had on the trip? And this one is for everyone, but we'll start with Josh.
Okay, my memory is we were in a restaurant in Vienna, I think, and we were at a table and we wanted to order some wine. And so the people at the table said, we want dry wine. And so the waitress came back with 3 glasses of wine. And they said, why did you bring 3 glasses? You ordered dry wine. So, dry in German means 3. So for some reason, that's the most memorable food thing that I keep.
I'll say a couple things. One is that I alluded a moment ago, trying to make 53 Jews happy when there are at least 54 sets of dietary restrictions for 53 Jews. I only eat bland food and I'm allergic to nuts and I don't like eggs unless they're just
Larry's got it. Larry's holding it up.
Yeah. Yeah. It's trying to make all that work, and then people who needed kosher meals or vegetarian meals. So I think it was the first or the second day, maybe in Poland. The restaurant we were supposed to go to was closed, but then we got them to open and make us some food, and we got fish. People can jump in here, but they showed the fish came out like whole fish with heads and everything and eyeballs. So that's my most memorable meal.
Well, I have a memorable meal, which was actually, we had very, as you can imagine, extremely long days. And when we were in Warsaw, they had a huge buffet in the morning, breakfast, hard-boiled eggs and fish and this and that. And the film crew, at least, knew that we weren't going to get to stop for meals. So somebody was slipping a hard-boiled egg into their pocket for the rest of the day. And the waitress, it wasn't just you, Rob, and the waitress came around and said, no pocket, no pocket. So we, and then the other time was when we were, I think it was in Łódź the first night, and all the places were closed, and we ended up with some cold pizza and beer. But it was a trip.
Well, I just have to jump in quickly. In Prague, by which time we were feeling like the really hard work was done, both for the chorale and the film crew, and we were starting to ease up a little bit. We went to see the famous clock in Prague, the one, that does all the stuff. And there was a little pizza place with very decent pizza across from it. And this was 1999. We fed the film crew of 6 with plenty of pizza and 2 very substantial, everybody had 24-ounce, very decent beer for $20. I never forgot about that. I've always wanted to go back.
I have a question. Given that there was some undercurrent of anti-Semitism, especially at the beginning when you were talking about those stars, how did it feel? Was there anything particularly striking when you did connect with audiences?
I'll give one quick answer, which is that in, I think it was Łódź, but maybe it was Warsaw. Maybe it was Łódź. A community choir opened for us. And, we were just our third, yeah, okay, and like our third day or something. And then afterwards, there was a reception, and maybe it was sponsored by the embassy. It's a little fuzzy, the US Embassy. And somehow or other, we ended up together singing Tumbaila Laika. This was not a Jewish choir, but it turned out that we all knew this. And we were sort of like swaying and holding arms. And so that was like a heck of a feeling when you just feel like, okay, music is a bridge for us.
I'll give a little anecdote, and again, somewhere in Poland, I forget which city, after a concert, I think it was a Friday night, and we were having a dinner, and there were a number of young people that joined us, and many of them were people who did not realize that they were Jewish until fairly recently, when the grandmother who had just died, and they had to hide their Jewish identity, not just because of the Nazis, but because of the other repressive regimes. And finally, on her deathbed, the grandmother says, you're Jewish. And some of these young people had been fashionably anti-Semitic, and now all of a sudden they're Jewish. And for some of them, they want to find out what it means. They want to express their Jewishness. So some of them came and had the Friday night dinner with us. And they had never seen such an expression, an open expression and beautiful expression of Jewishness. We were singing songs. And then we left wherever we had the dinner, maybe it was in the synagogue, walking back to the hotel. They were walking with us, and many of us were walking openly with a kippah. And Heather had spoken to this earlier. And they were aghast that you could actually walk down the street at night wearing a kippah, and that has stayed with me.
Along those same lines, Josh, I happened to be talking to one of the 22 survivors of the Łódź ghetto the first night in front of the Grand Hotel where the Nazis stayed, and he spoke a little bit of English, and I have a very minuscule amount of Yiddish, and we were gesturing a lot. And, you know, he wore the Chaim, and he had the open collar shirt. And I realized something was weird, and we were being checked out by skinheads. And I had to walk the 4 blocks back to the auditorium to help the crew break down. And the street lights were really dim. And I'm just thinking, what am I going to do if these guys all burst out of the car? And it's like somehow I plugged into a fear that was still there from 60 years ago. And that was my most eerie moment on the trip. I made it back okay, but it was scary.
May I just say that if the chat in itself is a rich experience. Peter Bronk, Peter, you're giving all kinds of wonderful information about the trip, and Phyllis talking about walking around saying, what do you want to eat? What do you want to eat? I think we're getting like a double dose of all the richness of the trip from some alums. It's great. So read the chat too. Yeah.
We have time for one more question, Gail.
Yeah.
Joyce, do you have a question or a comment?
No, I was just going to tell Josh that was in Krakow, where we had that young woman who had just discovered recently she was Jewish. And I think Krakow, in addition to not having suffered all the horrible indignities that other communities in Poland did, and the death, had been benefiting more recently from having been the place where Steven Spielberg filmed Schindler's List. And that square that we, where the Klezmer Festival was going on, was really a major part of the set there too. So in terms of anti-Semitism, you know, the community was starting to benefit a little bit financially from everything that Spielberg had poured in, and maybe we're feeling a little bit more receptive to what we were doing too.
Thank you, Joyce. And I want to repeat, now that I can see your face, thank you for all that you did to make the tour possible. You worked very, very hard for that.
It was wonderful to have been part of it and to be able to go with you.
Thank you.
All was quite amazing.
Well, I see our time is almost up, so I want to thank once again Rob, Pam, Heather, and of course Gail for keeping things going.
Gail, can I say one more thing?
Go ahead.
Are the Tillerman sisters still online?
I see Judy.
Judy, all 3 of them were here. Judy, Debbie, and
Debbie,
and
they were here.
and Barbara.
Yeah, I'm here. Oh, you're here somewhere? Okay.
And there they are. Hello.
Barbara was here. I don't know who Barbara. I'm here. I'm here. Yeah.
Hi, Barbara.
Hi, Barbara. Hi.
These are
Carol
the
Tellerman's daughters.
the daughters of Carol Tillerman, who you saw in the film earlier. Just wonderful, wonderful. Anyway, thank you all. Also should give a shout out to ACFEA, the travel agency that made all the wonderful arrangements for this trip. It's great to see you all, and I wish you good health and hope that someday, once again, we can continue to have these wonderful experiences of a community of expression. So, good night. Thanks again.
Good night, everyone.
Hi, thank you.
Great
job,
Josh. Gail, thanks. It was almost seamless except for segment 3.
You know, segment 3 decided it wanted to get shown a lot.
You just wanted to get to the fun stuff.
Apparently,
Thank
my
you, Rob
computer
and
is
Pam.
Everybody.
Thanks, Rob.
Thank you.
Thanks, Rob. Thanks, Pam. Thanks, Josh. Thanks, Heather.
Josh, Heather.
Thanks so much. That was great.
Thank you all.
Thanks, Larry. Larry, for the technical support that made my editing.
Oh, and thank you, Larry.
Got me the tape that I needed to edit. So let's remember that. Larry
Thanks,
Sandberg.
Ed and Nancy.
Good
Yes.
job, Larry.
Thank you, everybody.
Good to see Layla.
Thank you all. Rob and Pam, I need to speak to you, so get in touch with me, please.